I'm Jessie 28F now, but when I was 16, my world shattered overnight in a way I never saw coming. Back then life felt hard but normal enough. I lived in a worn-down blue rental with my parents and my younger brother Noah, doing what I could to help out while dreaming of stability and a future beyond our small town. My dad worked construction when he could, my mom waitressed at a diner, and we all just barely kept things together. Money was tight, arguments about bills filled the night air, but I believed they were doing their best and that somehow things would get better if I kept working hard. I focused on school, mowed lawns for extra cash, looked after Noah, and tried to keep hope alive. But looking back, I missed the quiet signs that something was deeply wrong. The hushed conversations, the forced smiles, the nights my dad didn't come home until late, my mom's constant worry. Then one morning I woke up to an empty house, no note except a single photo with "Good luck" scribbled on the back. They were gone just like that, leaving me behind to face the world alone. At 16 I thought my life was pretty normal. Or at least normal enough in the small town where I lived. Our house wasn't fancy. It was this faded blue 2-bedroom rental on a dead-end street, with a patchy front yard and a mailbox that leaned to one side like it had just given up. I shared a room with my younger brother Noah, who was 12 at the time. Our parents took the other room. My dad worked construction when he could get the jobs. He was the kind of guy who always seemed tired, like life had worn him out way before his time. His hands were always rough and cracked, and when he spoke it was usually short and to the point. He didn't laugh much. My mom was a waitress at this small diner on the edge of town. I remember she smelled like coffee and bacon most of the time, her hair always pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes tired but soft. Money was tight. That's probably the biggest understatement I can make. Every month felt like a juggling act of what bill could wait and what had to be paid now. There were nights when I'd hear them arguing in the kitchen after they thought Noah and I were asleep, their voices low but sharp. I knew those arguments were about money, about the landlord's warnings, about groceries and gas. But the next morning they'd put on their everything's fine faces and pretend we didn't hear a thing. I didn't resent them. Not then. I understood in my own way that they were doing their best. I tried to help where I could. After school I'd mow lawns or rake leaves for neighbors, anything to bring in a few extra bucks. I kept my grades up because I thought, maybe, if I worked hard enough I could get a scholarship and go somewhere. Anywhere. My dreams weren't big. Not like kids who wanted to be astronauts or rock stars. I just wanted a steady job, a small apartment, maybe a car that didn't break down every other week. I dreamed of stability. Of waking up without that heavy knot in my stomach, wondering what would go wrong that day. School was my escape. I liked the quiet of the library, the smell of old books, the hum of computers. I liked my English teacher, Mr. Harmon, who actually seemed to care when I spoke. He'd leave notes on my essays, encouraging me to write more. I started keeping a journal because of him, filling it with thoughts I didn't have the guts to say out loud. Noah looked up to me in that way younger brothers do. He was always tagging along, always asking questions, always wanting to help with whatever I was doing. He was bright, funnier than I ever was, and I tried hard to be the kind of big brother he could count on. The days all kind of blurred together back then. Wake up early, get Noah ready for school, scarf down toast or whatever was left in the cupboard, go to school, do my work, come home, help out, sleep, repeat. There wasn't much room for fun or friends. The few friends I did have drifted away because I couldn't hang out like they could. I couldn't afford movies or trips to the mall or video games. But I didn't mind too much. I told myself this was just how it was for now. That things would get better if I just kept my head down and worked hard. Looking back, there were probably signs that something wasn't right. My parents had grown quieter around me, more distant. There were times I'd walk into a room and they'd stop talking altogether, like I'd interrupted something important. My dad stopped asking how school was, stopped checking in on my lawn mowing gigs. My mom hugged me less. I figured they were just stressed. That maybe I'd done something to disappoint them, but I couldn't figure out what. There was one night about a week before it all happened that sticks out. I came home from a late study group at the library. The house was dark, which was strange because my mom usually kept a light on for me. When I walked in, I found them sitting at the kitchen table, the two of them whispering over a stack of papers. They didn't notice me right away, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked like a map or directions. My dad's face was tight, my mom's eyes red like she'd been crying. When they realized I was there, they shoved the papers aside. My dad mumbled something about going to bed, and my mom forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't ask questions. I wish I had. That week felt different in small, hard-to-name ways. My dad started spending more nights out, working late, or meeting someone about a job. My mom seemed jumpier. She was constantly checking her phone, staring off like she was somewhere else entirely. I kept thinking I'd talk to them, ask what was going on. But there was always something: homework, chores, exhaustion. And some part of me was scared of the answer. I went to bed every night telling myself that whatever was going on, we'd get through it. That we always did. The last night we were all together was so normal it hurts to remember. I helped Noah with his math homework. We ate dinner, boxed mac and cheese with hot dogs sliced into it. My mom let us watch TV for a bit before bed. She even kissed the top of my head like she used to when I was little. My dad ruffled my hair as I passed him in the hallway. And then I went to sleep thinking I was safe. I didn't know that by morning, everything I believed about family, about trust, about home, it would all be gone. The days that followed that quiet dinner felt heavier somehow, like the air in the house had thickened overnight. At first it was hard to explain. Nothing obvious had changed. The same old house, the same creaky floorboards, the same hum of the refrigerator that always seemed too loud at night. But there was something in the way my parents moved through the space, like they were guests in their own home, or maybe like they didn't want to leave footprints behind. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was overthinking, seeing shadows that weren't really there. But it kept piling up, The small things, the things that didn't quite fit. My dad, who usually left his boots by the front door, started keeping them in the truck. His toolbox, always on the back porch, disappeared one day. I noticed it when I went out to sweep, just gone. When I asked him about it that evening, he shrugged and said something about needing it for work. But the way he said it was different. Short, clipped, like he didn't want me asking any more questions. And so I didn't. My mom, who was never one to fuss with clothes beyond the uniform she wore at the diner, started doing laundry at odd hours. I'd hear the washing machine whirring after midnight, the dryer thumping long past when everyone should have been asleep. Once I got up for a glass of water and found her folding a pile of shirts I didn't recognize. When she noticed me standing there, she gave this startled little jump, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Couldn't sleep, she said, forcing a smile. Figured I'd get ahead on chores. I nodded, but something about it felt off. My mom was many things, tired, overworked, loving in her own quiet way, but I'd never known her to lose sleep over laundry. There were conversations too, whispered ones that stopped the second I walked into the room. I'd come home from school, the door creaking open, and hear the low murmur of their voices in the kitchen or the bedroom. But the moment they heard me, silence. Chairs scraping back, papers shuffled out of sight, voices switching to fake casual tones. One afternoon, I came home early because a teacher's meeting had canceled last period. The house was strangely quiet when I walked in. I could hear them talking in their bedroom, low, urgent voices. I crept closer, not meaning to eavesdrop at first, just wanting to know if something was wrong. Their words came in pieces through the thin door. Can't wait much longer. He'll figure it out if we're not careful. I don't like this, Mark. It feels wrong. Do you want to be stuck here forever? My father's voice shot back, sharper than I'd ever heard it. Then the sound of footsteps, and I barely made it down the hall in time, pretending I'd just come in. My mom appeared in the doorway, pale, eyes red like she'd been crying. My dad behind her, jaw clenched tight. Home early, she said, trying to sound light, but her voice wavered. Yeah. Last period got cancelled. I hesitated. Everything okay? Fine, my dad said before she could answer. We're just tired. Lot on our minds. They didn't say anything else and I didn't press. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd interrupted something important. Something meant to stay hidden. Noah seemed oblivious to it all, and I tried to protect that for him. He still came home eager to tell me about his day, about the science project he was excited for, about the jokes his friends had shared. I listened, smiled, acted like everything was normal. But at night, lying awake in the dark, I'd replay those snippets of conversation, trying to piece them together like a puzzle with too many missing parts. One evening, I stayed late at the library. I told myself I was catching up on homework, but really I just didn't want to go home. I walked back slowly, the autumn air sharp against my skin, leaves crunching under my worn sneakers. When I reached our street, I saw the glow of our living room lights spilling onto the porch. But when I got closer, I noticed the back of my dad's truck open, the bed piled with boxes. Not the kind of boxes he used for tools or scrap metal. These were taped shut, labeled in my mom's handwriting. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, watching through the window. My parents moved back and forth, carrying things from inside to the truck. Lamps, photo frames, clothes. My mom paused once, wiping her face with her sleeve, and my dad put a hand on her shoulder. I didn't know what to do. I could have walked in, asked what was going on, demanded answers. But I didn't. I stayed outside, hidden in the shadows until they finished loading. When they went back inside, I circled the block twice before finally heading in, pretending I'd just arrived. The boxes were gone. The truck bed was empty again, as if I'd imagined it. The tension grew thicker by the day. My mom started writing lists in her notebook. The same notebook she used to keep track of bills and grocery needs. But these lists were different. I caught a glimpse once. One page said, IDs, birth certificates, insurance papers. Another said, gas money, snacks for the road. For the road. The words hit me like a punch. But still, I didn't want to believe it. Families didn't just leave. Parents didn't just pack up in the dead of night and abandon their kids. This was just another hard patch, I told myself. Maybe they were planning a move, a fresh start for all of us. Maybe they didn't want to tell us until it was certain. I clung to that hope, as thin and fragile as it was. At school, I found it harder to focus. My grades slipped, teachers noticed, but I brushed off their concerns. Friends asked if everything was okay and I lied. Said I was tired, said things were fine at home. The nights were the hardest. I'd hear them in the kitchen long after Noah and I were supposed to be asleep. My dad pacing, my mom crying quietly. The scrape of chairs, the soft click of the back door opening and closing. Sometimes I thought I heard the truck start up, then stop again. Like they were testing how it would feel to drive away. One night, I found Noah sitting up in bed, his face pale in the moonlight spilling through our window. Do you think Mom and Dad are okay? He whispered. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to scare him. I ruffled his hair and forced a smile he couldn't see in the dark. They're just stressed, bud. Things are tough, but we'll be okay. He nodded, trusting me, and lay back down. But I stayed awake long after he fell asleep, listening to the sound of my parents moving around the house, packing away our lives one piece at a time. By then, deep down, I knew something was coming. But I still wasn't ready for just how fast, how final it would be. There's this thing about signs. You can ignore them, make excuses for them, pretend they're something else entirely. But they don't stop being signs. And no matter how hard I tried to believe otherwise, the cracks in our world had already started to split wide open. It was a Thursday night, though I didn't realize that would matter until much later. Just an ordinary, unremarkable Thursday. The kind that slips between the cracks of memory, except this one would become etched so deeply into my mind I could never forget it, no matter how hard I tried. That evening, I stayed up later than usual. I told myself it was because I had homework, but the truth was I didn't want to sleep. There was a heaviness hanging over the house, the kind that pressed against your chest and made it hard to breathe. I sat at the small desk in the corner of the room I shared with Noah, pretending to work on a history assignment, though my eyes kept drifting to the clock. The minutes crawled by. Noah fell asleep quickly like he always did. I envied that about him. His ability to shut out the world and sink into his dreams, untouched by the things that kept me awake. I kept glancing over at him, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, and telling myself that whatever storm was brewing, I could protect him from it. That's what older brothers were supposed to do, right? Sometime after midnight I heard the back door creak open. Quiet footsteps on the porch. The soft thud of something heavy being set down. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I crept to the window and pushed the curtain aside just enough to see. The truck was there, engine off, but it was packed. Boxes, bags, even the old cooler we only ever used on road trips or when the fridge acted up. My father stood by the driver's side, his head bent over the hood like he was steeling himself for what came next. My mother came out carrying a small duffel, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear into herself. She placed the bag in the truck bed, then looked back at the house. For a long time she just stood there, staring at the door like maybe she was waiting for it to open. Waiting for me or Noah to step out and stop them. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet felt nailed to the floor, my body frozen in that terrible moment where everything you thought you knew starts to slip away. I don't know how long I stood there watching them go back and forth, loading up the last of their things. The night felt endless, like the stars themselves were holding their breath. Then I heard it, the soft creak of the bedroom door. My parents' room. I turned, expecting to see them coming in, maybe realizing how wrong this all was. But no one was there. The door stood open, revealing a space stripped bare. No clothes on the hangers, no photos on the dresser, no loose change or receipts on the nightstand. Just an empty room that no longer belonged to anyone. That's when it hit me fully. This wasn't just them stepping out for a night drive to clear their heads. This wasn't them blowing off steam or taking a break or anything that could be explained away. They were leaving. Leaving me. Leaving Noah. I stumbled back to our room, my mind racing. I thought about waking Noah, about making him see for himself. But I couldn't. I didn't want him to have to know what I now knew. Not yet. Not until I was sure. A few minutes later I heard the front door creak open. Their voices, low and tense, drifted up the hall. "Just leave it where he'll see it," my father said. "Pause." "I hate this," my mother whispered. Her voice cracked on the words. "You knew this was the only way," my father replied. "Come on. Before we lose our nerve." I heard paper being placed on the table, the rustle of keys, the soft click of the door closing behind them. And then silence. I stayed at the window long enough to see the taillights of the truck disappear down the street, swallowed by the night. I didn't cry right away. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the empty road, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me so hard I felt like I might collapse under it. Finally, I forced myself to go to the kitchen. There on the table was the note. A single scrap of paper torn from one of my mom's notebooks. On it, in my dad's handwriting, were 2 words. "Good luck." That was it. No explanation, no goodbye. Just that. I stared at those words until they blurred, until the tears finally came and I couldn't see them anymore. I slid to the floor, the cold linoleum against my back, and let it all hit me. The shock, the betrayal, the crushing sense of abandonment. I don't know how long I sat there, the note clutched in my hand, the house eerily quiet around me. Eventually, I heard Noah stir in the bedroom, calling out sleepily for Mom. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and stood. I folded the note and shoved it in my pocket. I couldn't let him see it. Not yet. Not like this. I walked back to our room, put on my best fake smile, and told him everything was fine. That Mom and Dad had just stepped out for a bit and would be back soon. He believed me. Of course he did. He didn't have any reason not to. But I knew. I knew the truth that night, that they weren't coming back. That somehow, for reasons I still didn't understand, they had decided we weren't part of their future anymore. And so began the long, hard years of figuring it out on my own. Settled like a stone in my stomach. The house felt colder somehow, emptier, even though nothing had physically changed. But I could feel it in the walls, in the hollow echoes of my own movements. They were gone. Not on an errand, not on a trip. Gone. For a few precious moments I clung to hope. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe they would come through the door any minute now, carrying coffee and donuts, smiling like it had all been some kind of strange misunderstanding. But the minutes stretched on, and the silence screamed louder than words ever could. Noah stirred first. His hair was sticking up in all directions, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He rubbed them and looked at me confused. "Where's Mom?" he asked, his voice small. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. What could I say? That our parents had decided we didn't matter enough to stay? That they'd packed up and left us without even a real goodbye? "Maybe out getting breakfast," I lied. My voice cracked, betraying me. He nodded, accepting it because he had no reason not to. Because he was still too young to think anything worse. I watched him as he padded off to the bathroom, brushing his teeth like it was any other day, humming under his breath. I wished I could freeze him in that moment, protect him from what was coming. But the truth had a way of breaking through no matter how hard you tried to hold it back. As soon as he was out of sight, I grabbed the phone. I tried my dad's number first. The one he'd had for as long as I could remember. Straight to voicemail. His greeting sounded so normal, so casual. I hated it. I didn't leave a message. I hung up and called my mom's phone. Same thing. Voicemail. I tried again. And again. Maybe they'd hear it ring and realize how wrong this was, how cruel. Maybe they'd come back. but they didn't answer. I stood there in the kitchen gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced through possibilities, all of them impossible. Maybe something had happened to them. Maybe they'd been in an accident. Maybe. But no. I'd seen them leave. I'd watched the truck drive off into the night. This was no accident. This was a choice. Noah came into the kitchen looking around expecting to see our parents. His face fell when he realized they weren't there. Did they call? He asked. I shook my head. Why don't we go next door? Maybe Mrs. Henson saw them leave. His suggestion pulled me out of my frozen state. Yes. The neighbors. Someone had to know something. I grabbed my jacket and together we walked across the yard. The grass was still wet with dew, and the air smelled sharp and clean, like the world was starting fresh while ours was falling apart. Mrs. Henson answered after a few knocks. She was still in her robe, her hair in curlers, blinking at us like she couldn't quite place why we were standing on her porch at that hour. Morning, kids. Everything okay? I tried to find the words but they tangled up in my throat. Noah, oblivious to the full weight of it all, spoke first. Have you seen our mom and dad this morning? Mrs. Henson's face shifted, confusion clouding her warm eyes. She glanced past us toward our house. No, I can't say I have. But, did something happen? I shook my head, forcing a smile I didn't feel. They probably just went out early. Thought maybe you'd seen them leave. She hesitated, looking like she wanted to press further, but instead she just said, well, I'll keep an eye out, sweetheart. You let me know if you need anything, okay? I thanked her and we left. Noah skipped ahead, still convinced our parents would be back any moment. I trailed behind, my heart sinking deeper with every step. I tried the other neighbors too. The Patel family down the street, old Mr. Grady, the single mom with the toddler who lived 2 houses over. No one had seen anything. No one knew anything. And with each polite but puzzled shake of the head, my hope thinned. Back at the house, I started calling any number I could think of. My dad's boss at the garage. No answer. My mom's work. The manager said she hadn't shown up for her shift. I could hear the irritation in her voice when she asked if my mom was sick and why she hadn't called in. I mumbled something about not knowing and hung up. Next, I tried old friends of my parents, relatives we hadn't seen in years, anyone I could think of. Most calls went unanswered. The few who did pick up hadn't heard from them in months, sometimes years. Time felt slippery. The hours blurred together as I paced the house, trying the same numbers over and over, hoping for a different result. The only constant was the empty hum of the house and the growing pit in my stomach. I made Noah breakfast or tried to. Burnt toast, cereal with too much milk. He didn't seem to care. He kept asking when mom and dad would be back and every time I told him soon, the lie tasted worse. At one point he went outside to play in the yard, still blissfully unaware of how our world had shifted. I watched him from the window, my chest aching. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, but I couldn't. I had to keep it together, for him if not for myself. The house felt unfamiliar without them. I kept expecting to hear my dad's heavy boots on the porch, my mom's laugh from the kitchen. But the only sound was the clock ticking and the occasional creak of the old wood floors as I moved from room to room, searching for, I don't know what. A note I'd missed? A sign that this was all some mistake? I opened closets, drawers, cabinets. They'd taken more than I'd realized. Important papers, clothes, jewelry. Even the old photo albums were gone. It hit me then hard. This wasn't sudden. They'd planned this. All those late-night whispers, the lists, the packed truck. None of it was a whim. They'd chosen this. Chosen to leave us behind. As the afternoon bled into evening, I sat on the porch steps, numb. Neighbors came and went, waving, chatting about the weather or their own busy days, and I forced myself to wave back, to smile, to act like my world wasn't crumbling beneath my feet. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt the first sting of real panic. What was I supposed to do when night came again and they still weren't back? How was I supposed to keep Noah safe? What if someone came looking for them, bill collectors, police, anyone, and found only 2 kids alone? I went back inside and locked every door. I checked the windows twice. I pulled the curtains tight. The house felt too big, too empty. Every shadow seemed darker than it should have been. Every creak of the walls made my heart race. Noah fell asleep on the couch waiting for them. I covered him with a blanket and sat beside him, staring at the door, willing it to open. But it didn't. The first 24 hours felt like a lifetime. And deep down I knew the worst was yet to come. The hours ticked by, each one heavier than the last, until night folded over the house like a dark, suffocating blanket. The sunlight that I'd clung to all day had been my last fragile tether to hope, and now even that was gone, swallowed up by shadows that crept into every corner. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something that wasn't coming. I sat in the living room, the old floor lamp casting a dim glow over Noah's sleeping face. He dozed off hours ago, his small body curled beneath a blanket that didn't seem warm enough anymore. His lips moved now and then, whispering fragments of dreams or maybe calling out for our parents in his sleep. I envied him, the way he could slip into rest without the weight of understanding crushing him. But I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I tried, the silence seemed louder. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made my heart race. I kept glancing at the front door as if it might swing open at any second, revealing their faces, tired but relieved to be home. But it stayed shut. The lock I'd bolted earlier felt like a final, grim confirmation. This was it. They weren't coming back. The reality settled over me slowly, like cold rain soaking through clothes. I thought of all the little signs I'd ignored, all the moments that, in hindsight, screamed what was coming. The hushed arguments. The missing things. The hollow look in my mother's eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. And the note. Got that note. Good luck. Like I was setting out on some grand adventure and not being left to fend for myself in a house that felt less like home with each passing hour. I stood, my legs stiff from sitting so long, and wandered through the house. I turned on lights in every room as I went, as if brightness could chase away the emptiness. But the glow just made the bare spaces starker. The closet where my father's boots had always been lined up was empty. The dresser where my mother kept her scarves was bare. Even the bathroom cabinet, once cluttered with their things, looked abandoned. I ended up in their bedroom, though I didn't want to be there. It smelled faintly of them. Faded cologne, the hint of lavender from my mom's lotion. But even that was slipping away, as if they'd taken everything that mattered and left only ghosts behind. I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the dent where my father's pillow used to rest. The mattress felt too big, too hollow without their presence. Tears came then, silent and hot, rolling down my face unchecked. I tried to swallow them down, tried to be strong, because wasn't that what I had to do now? But the grief was too big, too heavy, and it spilled out in choked sobs that echoed in the empty room. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers from a world that seemed so cruelly indifferent. But what good would that do? There was no one to hear me. No one to answer. Just me and the walls and the night pressing in. Eventually, I forced myself back to the living room. I couldn't leave Noah alone. He was still sleeping, his face peaceful in a way that made my heart ache. I didn't want to wake him, didn't want to shatter the little safety he had left. So I sat down beside him, pulling my knees to my chest, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. I don't know how long I sat like that, but the weight of exhaustion finally began to pull at me. My body ached, my eyes burned, but the idea of going to bed, of lying down in my room without them in the house, filled me with dread. Still, I couldn't stay on the couch all night. I didn't want Noah to wake and see me like that, hollow-eyed and broken. I needed to be strong for him. I needed to at least pretend. So I gently lifted him, carrying him to our room like I had when he was younger and had fallen asleep during movie nights. He stirred only a little, snuggling into my shoulder, trusting me completely. The trust cut deep. I wasn't sure I deserved it. I laid him in his bed, pulled the blanket up to his chin and watched him for a while, just to make sure he was truly asleep. And then I was alone. I crossed to my bed and sat down, staring out the window at the dark yard. The street lights cast long shadows that danced across the grass, and every movement made me jump. My ears strained for the sound of a car, of footsteps on the porch, of keys in the lock. But there was nothing. Just the night and me in it. When I finally lay down, the bed felt wrong. The sheets were cold, the pillow too soft, the room too quiet. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, listening to the sound of my own breathing. I tried to tell myself that I was okay, that I could handle this, that I had to handle this. But the loneliness was crushing. It filled the room, seeped into my bones. I felt small in a way I hadn't since I was a little kid, like the world was too big, too full of dangers, and I didn't have anyone to protect me from them anymore. I thought about what the next day would bring, what I would tell Noah, what I would do when people started asking questions, how I would keep the lights on, keep the fridge stocked, keep us safe. The weight of it all felt unbearable. I turned onto my side, curled up tight, trying to make myself smaller, trying to hold in the fear that threatened to spill out. The tears came again, slow and silent, soaking into the pillow as I stared at the wall and wished for morning. I wished for them to come back. For this to all be some terrible dream that I could wake up from. But deep down I knew better. I knew the truth now. They were gone. And I was alone. Alone in a house that no longer felt like home. Alone in a world that suddenly seemed colder, sharper, more dangerous than it had the day before. And as I finally drifted into a restless, uneasy sleep, one thought echoed through my mind over and over. They left me. Morning light filtered through the curtains, pale and thin, as if even the sun wasn't sure it wanted to touch the hollow shell of what had once been my life. I blinked against it, disoriented at first. For the briefest moment I forgot. I forgot they were gone. I forgot the crushing weight of their absence. But reality seeped in quick, a bitter reminder that nothing had changed. Noah stirred in the bed across from mine, his hair a tangle of soft curls on the pillow. His breathing was slow and steady, still lost in the safety of sleep. I envied him and I hated myself for it, because I knew the moment he opened his eyes, he'd look for them. He'd expect breakfast smells in the air, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of our mother singing as she packed lunches. And when he didn't find those things, it would start to sink in for him too. I got up quietly, moving through the house like a ghost. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since before everything fell apart. I opened the fridge and stared at its sparse contents. Half a carton of milk, a few eggs, a jar of pickles, and a block of cheese that had seen better days. There was bread too, but it was already starting to go stale. I shut the door, the cold air spilling out onto my bare legs. I made toast, burned it, scraped off the worst of the blackened edges and forced it down. Felt like swallowing ash. I poured a glass of milk and stared at it, wondering how long it would last. Wondering how long we would last. When Noah woke, I put on the best smile I could manage. He asked where Mom and Dad were, his voice still hopeful, still believing in the lie I told the day before. I mumbled something about them having to leave early for work, about them being busy but coming back soon. The words tasted sour, but I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We went through the motions of a normal day, or as close as I could manage. I helped him with his homework even though my mind kept drifting to the empty driveway, the silent phone. We watched cartoons until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised colors. I kept waiting for headlights to appear, for the rumble of the truck pulling in, for the nightmare to end. But night came again, and with it, a deeper kind of fear. The first week was a blur of hunger, worry, and exhaustion. Each morning I woke up hoping things had somehow fixed themselves while I slept. And each morning I woke up to the same empty house, the same silent phone, the same hollow ache in my chest. I started rationing the food without even realizing it. A little less cereal in the bowl. A little more water in the milk to make it stretch. I skipped meals when Noah wasn't paying attention. He was too young to notice at first. Too trusting. By the third day the fridge was nearly empty. I stared at its barren shelves like maybe if I wished hard enough they'd fill themselves. I thought about going to the store, but that meant using money. And I didn't know how much we had or how to get more. My parents hadn't left anything behind for us. No cash. No instructions. Just a house that didn't feel like ours anymore and a pile of bills I didn't know how to pay. I found my dad's change jar. It sat on the dresser in their room, heavy with coins. I dumped it out onto the bed and counted every penny, every nickel, every dime. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I tucked it into my pocket, grabbed an old grocery bag, and told Noah we were going for a walk. The store was a mile away, but it felt farther. Every step felt like I was marching toward something I didn't understand, something I wasn't ready for. I kept my head down, avoiding the gaze of neighbors, of strangers passing by. I felt exposed, like everyone could see that I was lying, that I was hiding something. At the store I bought the cheapest things I could. A loaf of bread. A jar of peanut butter. A few bananas that were already starting to brown. I handed over the coins with shaking hands, praying it was enough. The cashier didn't say much, just gave me a look that I couldn't quite read. Pity maybe. Or suspicion. Back home I made peanut butter sandwiches and tried to act like this was normal. Like this was all part of some grand adventure. But at night, after Noah was asleep, I sat on the floor of my room and stared at the ceiling, wondering how long we could keep this up. I thought about calling someone. An aunt we hadn't seen in years. A teacher. The police. But every time I picked up the phone, fear stopped me cold. I didn't know what would happen if I told. Would they take us away? Split us up? Send us to strangers' houses, to foster homes? The thought of losing Noah too was unbearable. So I decided to hide the truth. To pretend as best I could that everything was fine. I avoided the neighbors as much as possible. When Mrs. Henson stopped by one afternoon, I told her our parents were working late. When Mr. Grady waved from his porch, I smiled and waved back like nothing was wrong. The hardest part was the nights. When the house was dark and the world was quiet, the fear crept in the deepest. I lay awake, listening to every sound. The creak of the house settling, the wind rattling the windows, the distant bark of a dog. Every noise felt like a threat. Every shadow felt like it was closing in. I tried to stay strong for Noah, but inside I was crumbling. I didn't know how to be what he needed. I didn't know how to be mother and father and big sister all at once. I didn't know how to fix what had been broken. By the end of the week, the weight of it all felt crushing. The food was running low again. The money was gone. The bills were piling up unopened on the kitchen table. And still no word. No sign. No clue where they had gone or why they had left us behind. But somehow I made it through. Somehow I kept putting one foot in front of the other, kept pretending everything was okay, kept the world from finding out the truth. Because as terrified as I was, one thing was clear. I couldn't let anyone take Noah from me. I couldn't lose him too. And so I held on. I held on to the fragile thread of hope that I could keep us together, that I could figure this out. I didn't know how, not yet. But I had to. I had no other choice. School had once been my anchor. Before everything fell apart, it was the one place that felt steady. The halls, the familiar faces, the scratch of pencils on paper, even the sound of the bell between classes. It had all been part of a world where I knew my place. I wasn't the star student or the most popular kid, but I belonged. I had routines. I had teachers who smiled when I answered a question right, friends who saved me a seat at lunch, plans for the future that felt within reach. But after they left, school became something else entirely. It became a reminder of everything I was losing. Each day I tried to keep up the act, putting on the clothes that no longer fit quite right because I was too tired to care, stuffing books into my bag like it mattered, forcing a smile when someone asked how I was. I went through the motions, but I felt like a shadow of myself, drifting from class to class, invisible in plain sight. I'd sit in those classrooms, the teachers' voices blending into a dull hum. I'd stare at the chalkboard, the scribbles of equations and dates and vocabulary words blurring together. My mind wasn't there. It was back at the house, running through mental checklists of what food we had left, what bills might come due, what I'd say if someone asked where my parents were. Every second away from Noah filled me with anxiety. What if something happened while I wasn't there? What if someone noticed, started asking questions? I stopped doing homework. Not on purpose at first. It just became impossible to concentrate when my nights were spent pacing the kitchen, counting out coins, trying to make meals out of nothing. I stopped raising my hand in class. I stopped hanging around after school. My friends started to drift away, confused by the distance I was putting between us, but I didn't have the energy to explain. How could I? How could I admit the truth? That I was scared. That I was barely holding it together. That every day felt like a fight just to get through the hours. The principal called me into his office one afternoon, maybe a week or two after everything had changed. I remember sitting in that chair, hands clenched in my lap, heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. He was kind at least. Asked if everything was okay at home. Said my teachers were worried. My grades were slipping. I seemed distracted. I lied, of course. Said things were fine. Said we'd just been busy at home. Promised I'd catch up. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe me. And after that meeting, going back to class felt even harder. Every glance from a teacher felt like suspicion. Every question felt like a trap. I felt like I was walking through a minefield, one wrong step from having everything exposed. The day I decided to stop going altogether wasn't dramatic. There was no big breaking point, no explosion of anger or tears. It was quiet. I woke up, made breakfast for Noah, packed his bag, walked him to the bus stop like always. I waved as the bus drove away, his small hand pressed against the window. And then I stood there for a long time, watching the empty street, feeling the weight of the day ahead press down on me. I turned and walked home. Past the school, past the corner store, back to the house that felt less like home with each passing day. I sat on the porch steps, staring out at nothing, and I thought about what school had become. Another place where I had to pretend. Another place where I had to wear a mask and act like everything was normal. And I couldn't do it anymore. The thought of sitting through hours of classes, listening to lectures I couldn't focus on, worrying about what was happening back home, it felt impossible. The energy I spent trying to keep up the illusion was energy I didn't have. I needed that energy for Noah. For keeping us afloat. I tried to reason with myself. Told myself it was temporary. That I could go back later when things were better. That school would always be there. But if I slipped, if someone figured out what was really going on, I could lose everything. I couldn't risk it. That afternoon I wrote a note. Just a few lines, but they took me hours to write. I didn't want to sound angry or desperate. I didn't want to give too much away. I thanked my teachers for everything. Said I needed time away. Said I'd be back. I folded the note, left it on my desk, and didn't look back. The first few days felt strange. Like I was skipping out on something important, like I was breaking the rules in a way that couldn't be fixed. I'd wake up and expect to pack my bag, grab my books, race for the bus. But instead I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring out the window, listening to the quiet of the house. The hours stretched long without school to fill them. I filled them with chores, with trying to keep the house in order, with worrying over every little thing. I cleaned rooms that didn't need cleaning, organized drawers that didn't need organizing. I scoured the cupboards, trying to piece together meals from scraps. I walked to the store when I could, bought what little I could afford. But beneath it all was guilt. Guilt that I was giving up on the one thing that might have been my way out. Guilt that I was letting down the people who believed in me. My teachers, my friends, myself. Guilt that I wasn't setting a better example for Noah. And yet I couldn't see another choice. School felt like a luxury now, something for kids who had the safety net I'd lost. I couldn't focus on grades and tests and essays when my mind was consumed with survival. Some nights, after Noah was asleep, I'd pull out my old textbooks and try to study. Try to convince myself that I wasn't giving up entirely. That I could still keep learning, still keep a piece of that old dream alive. But the words swam on the page and exhaustion always won in the end. I told myself I'd go back. Someday. When things were better. When I could breathe again without fear filling my lungs. But deep down I knew that the longer I stayed away, the harder it would be to return. The harder it would be to pick up the pieces of that life I'd left behind. And so I tried not to think too far ahead. I focused on the day in front of me. On making sure Noah was fed, that the house stayed warm, that no one asked too many questions. I pushed down the regret, the fear, the sense of loss that came with leaving school behind. Because survival came first now. And if that meant letting go of the future I'd once imagined, then so be it. I'd find another way. I had to. The day came when the house no longer felt safe. The walls that had once seemed like a shield became a prison closing in, a reminder of everything I couldn't hold together anymore. The food was gone. The bills piled up until I couldn't ignore them. The notices on the door changed from polite warnings to final demands. I'd done everything I could, but it wasn't enough. The day we left that house behind was one of the hardest of my life. I remember locking the door behind us, as if that simple act would somehow keep our life there from falling apart completely. I had one small backpack slung over my shoulder, stuffed with the bare essentials. Some clothes for me and Noah, the last bit of food I could scrape together, and a picture of us from better times. I took one last look at the place that had been home, then led Noah down the steps, away from everything we'd known. The streets were colder than I imagined. Even during the day, the wind cut through the layers we wore, and the sun did little to warm us. I tried to act like we were on some kind of adventure, like this was all part of a plan, but Noah wasn't a little kid anymore. He saw through it. He didn't say anything, but the way he clung to my hand told me he was as scared as I was. The first night I didn't know where to go. I didn't want to stay too close to the house. Someone might notice us, might ask questions I couldn't answer. But I didn't want to wander too far either, in case I thought of a way to fix everything. We ended up at a small park a few blocks away, one I'd gone to as a kid. We sat on the swings until the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on. I kept hoping someone would come looking for us. That by some miracle my parents would return, or a neighbor would notice and offer help. But no one did. That first night we huddled on a bench beneath the jungle gym, using my jacket as a blanket. I wrapped my arms around Noah and tried to keep him warm, tried to keep myself from shaking so hard that it would scare him more. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every sound set my nerves on edge. The rustle of leaves, the growl of distant dogs, the footsteps of people passing by. In the morning we walked. We walked for miles because it felt safer to keep moving. I looked for places where we might rest, where no one would bother us. An alley behind a grocery store. The back steps of an old library. A churchyard where no one seemed to care if we sat under the trees. But even in the quiet places, fear was my constant companion. Fear of being noticed. Fear of someone calling the authorities. Fear of being separated from Noah. It wasn't all bad though. There were moments of unexpected kindness. A man at a gas station saw us sitting on the curb and handed me a bottle of water and a sandwich without saying a word. A woman in a coffee shop let us use the bathroom without buying anything and slipped me a few dollars when no one was looking. I clung to those moments like lifelines, reminders that not everyone in the world was cold or cruel. But there was cruelty too. The shopkeeper who yelled at us for lingering too long near his store. The teenager who threw a soda can at us as we walked past, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. The people who looked right through us as if we didn't exist, as if we were already invisible. We tried couch surfing when we could. Friends from school, at least the ones I hadn't pushed away yet, sometimes let us stay a night. Their parents didn't always know. I'd wait until the house was quiet, then slip onto the couch or the floor in their room. But that couldn't last. I didn't want to wear out the thin welcome, didn't want anyone to ask too many questions. I started hearing about shelters. Places that might take us in at least for a little while. The first time I worked up the nerve to go, my heart pounded so hard I thought I might be sick. I was sure they'd see right through me, see that I was just a kid trying to take care of another kid, that I didn't belong there, that they'd call someone and have us taken away. But they didn't. The woman at the front desk was kind though tired looking. She didn't ask too many questions. Just gave us a place to sit, a blanket, and a hot meal that tasted better than anything I could remember. The shelter was crowded. The air was thick with the smell of too many people in too small a space. Some faces were hard, closed off. Others were kind, offering nods or small smiles that said they understood, that they'd been where we were. At night, I lay on a thin mattress on the floor, one arm around Noah, listening to the sounds of coughing, murmured conversations, the creak of the building settling. We stayed at that shelter for a few nights until the fear caught up to me again. I couldn't shake the thought that someone would notice, would ask questions I couldn't answer, would take Noah from me. So one morning before the sun was up, I gathered our things and we slipped out quietly back onto the streets. The days blurred together. I learned where to find food. Soup kitchens, churches that served meals, places where kind people handed out sandwiches or fruit to those who waited patiently in line. I learned where we could rest for a little while without being bothered. I learned how to blend in, how to move through the city without drawing attention. There were nights when we found shelter. A friend's garage. The backseat of an unlocked car. A storage shed that someone had left unlatched. And there were nights when the best we could do was a corner of a park, or the stoop of an abandoned building, or the narrow space between two dumpsters where the wind couldn't find us. Through it all, I tried to keep Noah's spirits up. We played word games as we walked. I told him stories about heroes who faced impossible odds and won. I let him believe as much as I could, that this was just a temporary adventure, that soon we'd find our way back to something better. But at night when he slept, I let the truth wash over me. The fear, the loneliness, the bone-deep exhaustion. The constant worry that I wasn't doing enough, that I was failing him, that I was failing myself. And yet, every morning I got up. Every morning I kept going. Because I had no choice. Because no one else was going to save us. Because as hard as it was, I still believed deep down that we could find our way out. And so we kept moving. Through the streets. Through the shelters. Through the kindness and cruelty of strangers. Through the endless days and the even longer nights. We kept moving because that was the only way to survive. It started with small things. Tiny chances that most people wouldn't even notice, but for me they felt like lifelines. The first time someone offered me money for a task, it wasn't a job in any official sense. It was a man unloading crates from the back of his van behind a convenience store. I was sitting on the curb with Noah watching the world go by when he called out. He asked if I could give him a hand. Without thinking twice, I sprang up, telling Noah to stay put. It wasn't much, just moving boxes of drinks and snacks from the van into the shop. But when he pressed a crumpled $10 bill into my hand afterward, it felt like I'd struck gold. I thanked him so many times that he laughed and told me not to wear out the words. I went back to Noah, heart pounding with a strange mix of pride and relief. That $10 meant a meal, maybe two if I stretched it. It meant hope. From then on, I kept my eyes open for any opportunity. I offered to sweep the sidewalk in front of small shops, helped stack chairs at a cafe after closing time, and once spent an afternoon picking up trash at a park after an event. The pay was almost nothing. Sometimes just a few dollars, sometimes a sandwich or a cup of coffee, but I took it all, grateful for anything that kept us going. There were moments when temptation whispered to me. When I saw wallets poking out of back pockets or cash registers left unattended, or stores with doors propped open and no one in sight. But I never gave in. I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, I saw Noah's face. I thought about what kind of example I'd be setting. I thought about what might happen if I got caught. No, I told myself, if we were going to survive, it had to be by doing things the right way. Finding work wasn't easy. Most places looked at me and saw a kid, someone they couldn't trust, someone they couldn't hire even if they wanted to. But sometimes people were willing to look past that. There was an older woman who ran a flower stall at the market. She saw me hanging around one morning waiting for the soup kitchen to open, and asked if I could help her unload her van. I worked for her on and off after that, sweeping up petals, carrying buckets, running small errands. She didn't pay much, mostly in leftovers from the stall or a few dollars here and there, but she treated me kindly. She never asked too many questions and I was grateful for that. I tried not to let Noah see how hard it was. I wanted him to believe that I had a plan, that everything was under control. So I told him stories about how these small jobs were just stepping stones, about how we were going to save up, get a place of our own, start fresh. At night, when we huddled together on a borrowed mattress or a patch of grass beneath the stars, I whispered dreams of a better future. A tiny apartment with a real bed for each of us. A fridge full of food. A school where he could make friends and not have to worry about anything but learning and playing. The truth was, I didn't know how we'd get there. Every dollar I earned disappeared almost as soon as it came. On food, bus fare when Noah was too tired to walk, socks to replace the ones with holes, aspirin for the headaches that came from stress and hunger. But I kept going. Because stopping wasn't an option. There were small victories along the way. The first time I saved enough to buy us both a hot meal at a diner, I felt like I was on top of the world. I watched Noah's face light up as he bit into his burger, saw the way his shoulders relaxed when he realized he could eat as much as he wanted. I let him order pie for dessert, even though it meant I'd have to go without later. It was worth it to see him smile like that. Another time I found a man fixing up a house a few blocks from the shelter where we'd spent the night. I offered to help carry supplies and he let me. I spent the whole day hauling wood, hammering nails, sweeping sawdust. My hands were blistered and raw by the end of it, but when he handed me $20 and said I'd done a good job, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. I learned how to stretch what little I had. How to make a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter last as long as possible. How to find the stores that marked down food at the end of the day. How to spot the places where we could rest for a little while without getting chased off. There were hard lessons too. Times when people promised to pay and didn't. Times when I worked for hours, only to be told they hadn't needed my help after all. Times when I was cursed at or pushed aside, treated like I was less than nothing. But through it all, I held on to the belief that we could make it without sinking into the darkness that seemed to lurk at the edges of our world. Without stealing, without lying, without becoming someone I didn't want to be. At night, when the city quieted down and the stars blinked above us, I'd let myself dream. I dreamed of a steady job, of saving up enough to get a small place where we could lock the door and feel safe. I dreamed of going back to school someday, of making something of myself, of giving Noah the kind of life he deserved. Those dreams kept me going. They gave me a reason to get up each morning, to keep looking for work, to keep fighting even when I was exhausted and hungry and scared. And slowly, piece by piece, we began to carve out a life on the edges of the world. A life built on small jobs and big dreams. A life that was far from easy, but one that I could be proud of. Because no matter how hard it got, I knew one thing for sure. I would do whatever it took to keep us together, to keep us safe, to build a future that was ours. And as long as I had that, I had everything I needed to keep going. It's strange how hope can sneak in when you least expect it, and even stranger how quickly it can be torn away. I had begun to feel for the first time in months like maybe things were turning around. The small jobs weren't much, but they were adding up. A few dollars here, a sandwich there, the kindness of strangers who didn't ask too many questions. It was a fragile kind of stability built on shaky ground, but it was all we had. And then came the man who promised more. His name was Jason. At least that's what he told me. He found me outside a hardware store one afternoon, after I'd spent an hour hoping someone might need help loading lumber or carrying bags of soil. He was older than me, maybe in his early 30s, dressed in work boots and a faded jacket that looked like it had seen its share of tough days. His truck was packed with tools and scrap wood, the kind of cluttered bed that spoke of a man who worked with his hands. He smiled at me like he understood what I was going through, like he saw something familiar in my worn-out sneakers and too-thin coat. He said he could use an extra pair of hands. Said there was a remodeling job he was working on, and if I didn't mind hard work, he'd pay me at the end of each day. Felt too good to be true. But I wanted to believe. I agreed. Of course I did. What choice did I have? He bought me a sandwich and a bottle of water, and I took it as a sign that he was one of the good ones. That night I told Noah we were going to be okay. That maybe this was the break we needed. I let him dream along with me about a future that felt, for a brief moment, within reach. The first day was brutal. We tore out old drywall, hauled debris to a dumpster, and swept up endless piles of dust. My arms ached, my back felt like it might snap in two, and my hands were scraped and raw. But I didn't care. I worked like my life depended on it, because in a way it did. At the end of that day, Jason handed me $20. He promised more the next day, said he needed to hit the bank. I wanted to question him, wanted to ask why he hadn't gone before, but I told myself to be patient. People like him probably didn't have easy access to cash either. I convinced myself that he was good for it, that the work was honest and the pay would come. And so I showed up the next day. And the day after that. Each day the jobs got harder. We moved heavy appliances, tore up flooring, painted walls. Jason kept promising that he'd square up soon. He talked about how much he appreciated my help, how he saw potential in me, how he'd been down on his luck once too. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I started to imagine how I'd use the money he owed me. I pictured buying us a week at a cheap motel just so we could sleep in a bed and take hot showers. I pictured buying Noah shoes that didn't have holes in the soles, maybe a toy or two to remind him what it felt like to be a kid. But the money never came. On the 5th day I showed up to the house we'd been working on and Jason was gone. The truck, the tools, everything. At first I thought maybe he'd just stepped out for supplies. I waited for hours, pacing the sidewalk, stomach twisting in knots as the truth began to sink in. He wasn't coming back. When it finally hit me I felt sick. How could I have been so stupid? I'd let myself hope, let myself trust, and now we were worse off than before. I'd wasted nearly a week of backbreaking work for nothing. Worse, I'd kept Noah waiting, kept him believing in promises I should have known better than to make. That night I walked farther than I ever had, trying to outrun the shame and anger burning in my chest. I kept replaying every conversation with Jason, every red flag I'd ignored. The way he always found a reason to delay paying me. The way he talked big about future jobs but got vague when I asked about the money he owed. I didn't want Noah to see me like that. But he did. He saw the slump of my shoulders when I came back empty-handed. He saw the way I couldn't meet his eyes. And yet he didn't blame me. He didn't say anything, just sat next to me in the dark and leaned his head on my shoulder. That hurt worse than any words could have. The next few days were the hardest I'd faced yet. Not just because we were hungry or cold, though we were, but because I'd lost something more valuable than money. I'd lost a piece of my trust. A piece of the part of me that believed in the kindness of strangers, in the possibility that people might help because it was the right thing to do. But I learned to ask questions. I learned not to take promises at face value. I learned to trust actions over words. And I learned that while the world could be cruel, I couldn't afford to let that cruelty change who I was. I could have turned bitter. I could have let that betrayal push me toward choices I'd always tried to avoid. It would have been so easy to take what we needed to stop caring about right and wrong. But I didn't. Because as much as Jason had taken from me, he hadn't taken everything. He hadn't taken my determination. He hadn't taken my love for Noah. He hadn't taken my belief that somewhere out there good people still existed. And so I kept going. Bruised but not broken. Wiser but still holding on to hope. I told myself that every setback was just another step in the long climb out of the hole we were in. That the dreams I'd whispered to Noah at night weren't dead. Just delayed. And as the city lights flickered above us and another cold night settled in, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let this defeat define me. I wouldn't let one man's lies become the reason I stopped trying. Because the world was hard enough. I didn't need to make it harder by giving up on the small spark of goodness I still carried inside. The days after Jason's betrayal felt heavier than any I had known before. Not because I was hungrier or colder than I'd been, though I was, but because the weight of disappointment pressed down on me in a way I hadn't expected. I had believed. I had trusted. And that trust had been shattered. But as the nights grew longer and the mornings came with the same uncertain promise, I realized something important. I was still standing. I could have let it break me. For a while I almost did. There were moments when I stared out at the streets, at the cars that passed, at the people hurrying by with places to go and lives to live, and I wondered if it would ever get better. I wondered if I would always feel like I was running in place, working so hard just to stay barely above water. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the despair, I felt something else stir. A small flicker of determination, stubborn and fierce. Jason had taken advantage of me, but he hadn't taken everything. He hadn't taken my will to survive. He hadn't taken my desire to build something better, no matter how small or slow that building might be. And so I started over. This time I approached things differently. I kept my eyes and ears open not just for work but for anything I could learn. I began to notice things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way certain workers at the shelter fixed broken chairs and tables with simple tools. The way a man down at the park tied knots and repaired fishing nets, his fingers quick and sure. I watched and I listened. And when I got the chance I asked questions, not too many, not enough to annoy but enough to learn. There was a man named Luis who worked in the back of a small diner, not far from where I often waited for odd jobs. He washed dishes, fixed broken hinges on doors, patched up chairs with loose legs. I started offering to help him carry trash to the dumpster or sweep the alley behind the place, hoping to earn a meal or a few dollars. Luis didn't have much to give, but after a while he started showing me small things. How to use a screwdriver properly. How to tighten bolts that had loosened. How to patch a torn seat with scraps of vinyl. It wasn't glamorous, but it was knowledge. And knowledge felt like power. Each small skill I picked up felt like adding another brick to the foundation I was trying to build. The first time I fixed something on my own, a broken latch on a shelter locker, I felt a kind of pride I hadn't felt in a long time. No one had asked me to do it. No one had paid me. But when the latch clicked shut and the door stayed closed, I felt capable. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had something to offer beyond my willingness to work. I started finding small ways to use what I was learning. When someone's shopping cart lost a wheel, I offered to help get it back on. When a man's bicycle chain came loose, I asked if I could try fixing it. Most people were surprised that I even wanted to help, but they let me. And when I succeeded, when the cart rolled or the bike pedaled smooth again, they often gave me $1 or $2 or a sandwich or just a grateful smile. I collected those moments like treasures. I also started saving. It wasn't much at first, just coins, the rare dollar bill. I found an old tin can behind a building and cleaned it out, hiding it deep in my pack where no one would think to look. Every time I earned something, I tried to put at least a little bit into that can. Sometimes it was just a few pennies. Other times, a crumpled dollar I didn't dare spend unless we absolutely had to. Watching those small amounts add up felt like watching hope take shape. For the first time since I'd been left behind, I felt like I had some control, however small, over my future. I didn't have to rely entirely on luck or the kindness of strangers. I could rely at least in part on myself. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted nothing more than to give up. Days when it rained and we were soaked through, shivering and cold. Days when the little bit of money I'd managed to save had to be spent on food because there simply wasn't any other choice. Days when my hands were so sore from work that I could barely grip a tool or tie my shoes. But each time I faced one of those days, I reminded myself of what I was working toward. I thought about the first time I'd managed to patch that locker latch. The first time I'd fixed a cart or a bike. The first time I'd earned $1 without having to beg or rely on empty promises. I learned to take pride in the small victories. They kept me going. There was one night after a long cold day, when I sat with Noah beneath the overhang of a closed store. We shared the last of a loaf of bread I'd managed to buy, and I told him about the things I'd learned that week. I told him about the cart I'd fixed, about the chair I'd patched, about how I was starting to figure out how to make things work when they broke. His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in a while and he said, "You're getting really good at this." It was such a simple thing for him to say. But it meant everything. Because in that moment I realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. Bit by bit, skill by skill, I was becoming stronger. And with each small success I felt a little more sure that someday somehow we'd get out of this. I knew the road ahead was still long. I knew there would be more setbacks, more betrayals, more nights when I questioned whether I could keep going. But I also knew that I had something no one could take from me. I had resilience. And as long as I held on to that, as long as I kept learning and trying and building, I had a chance. So I kept going. with blistered hands and aching muscles, with a heart that had been bruised but not broken, with a mind that was finally starting to see a way forward, however slow and hard that way might be. Because now I knew the truth. Strength wasn't something that came all at once. It wasn't something you found in a single big moment. It was something you built, piece by piece, through every small victory, every lesson learned, every time you got up after being knocked down. And I was building that strength, one day at a time. Some people say that when you're at your lowest, that's when the right person comes along. I don't know if that's always true, but I do know that when you're desperate enough to look for good, you start seeing it in the places you least expect. For me, it happened on a gray morning when the city felt heavier than usual, and I was starting to think maybe the strength I'd been clinging to wasn't going to be enough. It had rained the night before, hard and cold, the kind of rain that soaks you through no matter how much you try to stay dry. My clothes were damp, my shoes squelched with every step, and the chill had settled deep into my bones. I hadn't eaten in almost a day and a half because the few dollars I'd scraped together had gone toward a pair of socks for Noah. The thin ones he'd been wearing had fallen apart, and I couldn't stand the thought of him walking barefoot in that kind of cold. I was standing in front of a hardware store again, hoping maybe someone would need help hauling supplies. My stomach growled loud enough that I glanced around, embarrassed, as if the people passing by might hear it and judge me for it. But no one was looking. They were busy with their own lives, their own worries. And then I saw him. He wasn't anyone special at first glance. Just an older man, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, wearing a worn flannel shirt and jeans, pushing a cart filled with buckets of paint and bags of nails. His hair was mostly gray, his face lined in that way that comes from years of hard work in the sun. But what caught my attention was the way he moved, slow, deliberate, and clearly struggling a bit with the weight of his load. Without thinking, I stepped forward and asked if he needed a hand. He looked at me, really looked at me in a way most people didn't. Not like I was invisible or a nuisance. Just a person. He gave me a nod and said, "Sure. Appreciate it." I helped him load everything into the back of an old pickup. I figured that would be it, a quick favor, maybe a thank you, maybe not. But when we finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few dollars, holding them out to me. I shook my head. I didn't want to take it. It had been nothing, just a small thing. But he insisted. "Look," he said, "you helped me out. Take it. And if you're not busy, I could use another set of hands at my shop." My first instinct was caution. After Jason, after all the times I'd been let down, I didn't trust offers like that. But something about this man felt different. Maybe it was the way he didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Maybe it was the quiet way he spoke, like he wasn't trying to sell me on anything. Just stating a simple truth. So I followed him. His name was Walt. He owned a small repair shop at the edge of town, the kind of place where people brought broken chairs, busted lawnmowers, wobbly tables, and anything else they didn't want to throw away just yet. The shop was cluttered but neat in its own way. Tools hung on pegboards, jars of screws and nails lined the shelves, and the air smelled like sawdust and machine oil. That first day he had me sweep the floor and organize some scrap wood. Nothing fancy. But he paid me for it, right there, no promises about tomorrow. Just honest work for honest pay. Over the next few weeks I kept showing up. Walt never said much about it, just nodded when I arrived and handed me a broom or a tool. Bit by bit he started showing me how to do things. At first it was little stuff. How to sand a piece of wood, how to replace a mower's spark plug, how to fix a loose table leg so it didn't wobble anymore. But as time went on he taught me more. How to measure twice and cut once. How to listen to a machine and tell what was wrong just by the sound. How to take pride in doing something right, even if no one else would ever see the work you put into it. He didn't talk much about himself. I learned that he'd been doing this kind of work all his life. That he'd run the shop alone since his wife passed a few years earlier. That he had no kids of his own, no family nearby. Maybe that's why he took a chance on me. Or maybe he just saw a kid trying his best not to drown. Whatever the reason, Walt became more than a boss. He became a kind of guide. The kind I didn't even know I needed. He never asked why I was out there on my own. Never pushed me to explain where my family was or what had happened. But he made sure I left with food in my belly. A sandwich here, a thermos of soup there. He'd slip me an extra couple of bucks when I'd stayed late or worked through lunch. And every now and then he'd give me a look, that quiet, steady look of his, and say, "You're doing good, kid. Keep at it." Those words mattered more than I can say. One afternoon, after we'd finished patching up a busted fence someone had brought in for repair, Walt handed me a small toolbox. It wasn't new. The paint was chipped and the handle was worn smooth from years of use. But inside, everything was clean and organized. A hammer, screwdrivers, pliers, a measuring tape. Tools that could help me keep learning, keep building. "This was mine when I was starting out," he said. "Figure it's time it went to someone else who'll use it right." I don't think I've ever been given a gift that meant so much. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Someone believing in me. Someone seeing worth where so many others had only seen trouble or burden. Walt didn't just teach me how to fix things. He taught me how to believe that I could. And as I kept working with him, I started to believe in myself a little more too. I started to see that maybe I wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe I was starting to build something real. A future. A skill. A place in the world. There were still hard days. Plenty of them. Nights when the cold felt unbearable. Mornings when hunger gnawed at me before I even opened my eyes. But with each tool I learned to use, with each piece of broken furniture or machinery I helped make whole again, I felt stronger. I felt like maybe I could make myself whole again too. Walt didn't solve all my problems. He didn't magically make the world easier. But he gave me something priceless. A chance. A chance to prove to myself that I could do more than just scrape by. That I could learn. That I could grow. That I could build a life, one nail, one screw, one repair at a time. And for that I'll always be grateful. There are moments in life that feel like the world tilts just enough to change everything. They don't always come with fireworks or applause. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as an ordinary day that somehow ends differently. For me, that turning point came on a crisp autumn morning, with the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the hum of life moving forward all around me. I had been working alongside Walt for close to a year by then. His shop had become more than a place to earn a few dollars. It had become my anchor, the one steady thing in a life that still felt like it could unravel at any moment. Each day there taught me something new, not just about tools and repairs but about patience, responsibility, and the slow, steady work of building trust. With every table I mended, every engine I got running again, I was, in my own way, patching up the torn parts of myself. But no matter how hard I worked, there was always that lingering sense of impermanence. I was still couch surfing most nights, or crashing in a corner of the shop when Walt didn't mind. My clothes were mostly hand-me-downs and every dollar I earned felt like it could slip through my fingers too easily. I told myself I was surviving and that was enough. But deep down I wanted more. I wanted to stop feeling like a ghost in the world, half seen, half here. I wanted something solid, something mine. That's why, when the chance came, I almost didn't believe it was real. It started with a customer. A woman named Rachel who ran a small grocery on the other side of town. She came into the shop with a broken display case that needed fixing, and I helped Walt patch it up. She watched me work, asked a few questions, and then as she was leaving, paused at the door. "You're good with your hands," she said. "Ever think about steady work? I could use someone reliable at the store. It's nothing fancy but it's honest work and it comes with a roof over your head." For a second I just stared at her, unsure if I'd heard right. Steady work. A roof over my head. The words echoed in my mind like some kind of dream. I'd gotten so used to scraping by that the idea of stability felt foreign, almost dangerous, like trusting a bridge that might collapse the moment I stepped on it. But Walt gave me a nod, that quiet, encouraging nod of his. And something inside me shifted. I took the job. Rachel's store wasn't much to look at. A small corner grocery with creaky floors and narrow aisles, the kind of place where customers knew the owner by name. My work started simple, stocking shelves, sweeping up, unloading deliveries. But as the days turned into weeks, Rachel taught me more. How to manage the cash register. How to keep inventory. How to spot when a supplier was trying to shortchange her. She was tough but fair and she expected me to keep up. I did. The store came with a tiny apartment upstairs. Just one room really, with a mattress on the floor, a battered dresser, a hot plate, and a window that overlooked the street. The first night I spent there, I lay awake for hours, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the city outside. I kept expecting someone to knock on the door and tell me it had all been a mistake. That I didn't belong there. That I didn't deserve it. But no one came. The apartment was mine. For the first time in years, I had a key in my pocket and a door I could lock behind me. My own space. My own little piece of the world. It wasn't easy. The job was tiring and there were nights I fell asleep with my clothes still on, too exhausted to care. There were mornings I woke before dawn, my mind racing with worries about bills and responsibilities. But there was pride too. Pride in buying my own food, in paying my own rent, in knowing that every inch of that apartment was earned through my own work. Bit by bit I started to dream bigger. I enrolled in night classes at the community center. Nothing fancy, just a GED program. But sitting in that classroom, pen in hand, textbooks open, I felt a kind of hope I hadn't felt in years. It was hard balancing work and study. Some nights I barely slept. Some mornings I showed up to the store bleary-eyed, running on coffee and sheer willpower. But I kept at it, because I knew what it felt like to have nothing and I wasn't going back. Rachel and Walt both cheered me on in their own ways. Rachel gave me flexible shifts when she could. Walt stopped by the store now and then, dropping off sandwiches or just checking in. Neither of them said much about it, but I knew they were proud. And that mattered. Mattered more than I could say. The day I earned my diploma wasn't marked by any grand celebration. I didn't have family there to applaud, no one waiting with balloons or banners. But as I stood there, certificate in hand, I felt taller. Stronger. Like the world had shifted again, just enough to open a door I hadn't thought I'd ever reach. That night, I unlocked my apartment door, stepped inside, and looked around at the small, humble space that I had filled with second-hand furniture and hand-me-down dishes. And for the first time, I didn't see what was missing. I saw what I'd built. I saw proof that I could do it. That I had done it. There were still challenges ahead. I knew that. Life wasn't going to magically become easy. But I had crossed a line, moved from just surviving to living. To building. And that changed everything. That autumn morning when Rachel offered me the job, I couldn't have known what it would lead to. But looking back, I see it for what it was. The moment the tide turned. The first real step toward independence. Toward a future I could claim as my own. And as I stood at that window looking out at the city lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt free. It's strange how life can feel like it's finally coming together, only to slip through your fingers like sand when you least expect it. I had tasted stability. I had stood on my own feet, paid my rent, gone to work every day and earned the small victories that made me believe I was finally safe. But life, as I would learn again, has a way of humbling you just when you think you've outrun the storm. The first signs that things were about to fall apart came slowly, like the way the air changes before a downpour. Rachel's store, the one that had given me my first sense of belonging in years, started to struggle. A new chain supermarket had opened just 5 blocks away. Big, bright, shiny, and cheap. The kind of place where people didn't care if they knew the owner's name, as long as they could get milk for 50 cents less. I watched as customers we'd seen for years began to drift away. At first, Rachel tried to hold out, offering small discounts, adding a few new items to the shelves, trying everything she could to keep the store afloat. But no matter how hard she fought, it felt like watching someone try to plug a sinking ship with their bare hands. There were days when no one walked in at all. I'd sweep the already clean floor, wipe down the spotless counters, reorganize shelves that didn't need it, just to fill the silence. Rachel stopped smiling as much. I could see the worry in her eyes, the weight of it bending her shoulders a little more each day. And then came the day when she called me into the back office, shut the door and sat down across from me. She didn't need to say much. I saw it in the way her hands trembled as she folded them on the desk. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I can't afford to keep you on anymore. I don't even know how much longer I'll be able to keep the doors open." I nodded. I wanted to be strong for her. After all, she had given me so much. More than just a job, more than just a roof. But inside, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I thanked her, told her I understood, and walked out of that store for the last time with my head high. But as soon as I turned the corner, out of sight, my legs felt weak and I had to lean against the cold brick wall to catch my breath. The apartment above the store had been part of the job. No job meant no home. Rachel gave me a few weeks, a kindness I didn't take for granted, but the clock was ticking. I started looking for work right away, pounding the pavement, filling out applications at every shop, diner, and warehouse I could find. But the city was in a slump and no one was hiring. Days turned into weeks, and the little bit of money I had saved started to vanish, spent on cheap meals and bus fare to chase leads that went nowhere. I tried to hide my fear, but it crept in at night when I lay on the mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I would do when the time ran out. I felt that old ache of loneliness again, that hollow emptiness that I'd fought so hard to fill. I told myself I'd figure it out. I always had. But each day that passed chipped away at my confidence. When the eviction came, it came quietly. Rachel cried when she handed me the notice. I hugged her and thanked her for everything. I didn't want her to feel guilty, though I knew she did. I walked out of that building with everything I owned stuffed into 2 garbage bags. The city felt bigger and colder than ever as I stepped onto the street with no place to go. At first, I crashed on the couch of someone I thought was a friend. A guy named Nate I'd met at the community center. He seemed solid, had his own tiny place, and said I could stay until I got back on my feet. I helped him out around the apartment, cooked when I could, cleaned up after myself, stayed out of the way. But after a few weeks, his hospitality started to wear thin. I noticed the way he avoided me, the way his friends would glance at me like I was some stray he'd taken in. And then one night I came back to find my bag sitting outside his door, a note taped on top. "Sorry, man. Can't do this anymore." It hurt. Not just the betrayal, but the way it made me feel invisible again, unwanted. I didn't have the energy to be angry. I just picked up my bags and kept walking, because what else could I do? The streets were merciless. The nights were long, the concrete unforgiving. Parks, bus stops, alleyways. Wherever I could find a corner to curl up in, I took it. I kept my head down, tried to stay out of trouble, tried not to let the shame consume me. There were moments of kindness. A stranger who handed me a sandwich without a word, a shelter worker who slipped me an extra blanket. But there was cruelty too. People who looked at me like I was trash, who crossed the street to avoid me, who muttered under their breath about lazy bums and losers. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold or even the exhaustion. It was the isolation. The feeling that I had failed, that after everything I'd survived I was back to square one. That all the progress I'd made was gone in an instant. But even at my lowest, something inside me refused to give up. I reminded myself of what I'd built once. If I'd done it before, I could do it again. The city hadn't beaten me yet. I clung to that hope, fragile as it was, because it was all I had. And so with each sunrise I kept moving, kept searching for a way back. Because I knew the only way out was through, and I wasn't ready to let this be the end of my story. The grind began not with a grand plan, but with desperation and a stubborn refusal to let the streets claim me for good. I woke up each morning sore from another night on concrete or the hard floor of an overcrowded shelter, but I rose all the same. I didn't have the luxury of sleeping in or feeling sorry for myself. Every day was a battle to survive, and survival meant finding work, any work. My first break came through a diner on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where the neon sign flickered, and the scent of grease clung to your clothes long after you left. I went in to ask for water, but the owner, a thick-set man with a tired face named Gus, took one look at me and asked if I was looking for work. I must have looked bad, skinny, hollow-eyed, desperate. I said yes before he finished the sentence. He handed me a dish towel and pointed to the sink. That first job was brutal. I scrubbed pots and plates until my hands cracked and bled. The pay was barely enough for bus fare and cheap sandwiches, but it was something. Gus didn't say much, but he paid me in cash at the end of each shift. I saved every crumpled bill, shoving them into an old tin I kept hidden in my pack. It wasn't just about the money. It was about clawing my way out of the hole I'd fallen into. One job wasn't enough. I knew that from the start, so I took on more. After the diner closed at midnight, I'd head to a warehouse down by the river where I worked unloading trucks. It was back-breaking labor. Boxes heavier than they had any right to be, the smell of diesel in the air, and foremen who barked orders like drill sergeants. My muscles burned, my feet ached, but I kept going. I had to. Every shift meant more bills in the tin, more steps toward freedom. When I wasn't working, I was looking for more ways to earn. I cleaned offices early in the morning before the suits arrived. I swept floors in a mechanic's shop for a few bucks. I even collected cans and bottles for change. There was no shame in it, not for me. Shame didn't put food on the table or pay for a roof. The days blurred together, one long, endless hustle. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Sometimes I'd close my eyes for minutes at a time, leaning against a wall, on a bus, in a bathroom stall. My body felt like it was running on fumes, but my mind stayed sharp. I kept my eyes on the goal. I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted a life. A real one. As the months turned into years, I began to rebuild. I found a tiny room in a rundown boarding house. The walls were thin and the plumbing rattled, but it was mine. I paid rent on time, kept my head down, stayed out of trouble. I kept saving. Every spare cent went into that tin or later into a bank account I opened at a credit union that didn't look at me like I didn't belong. But the hustle wasn't just about money. I knew that if I wanted more than just to scrape by, I had to be more. So in the few hours I had between jobs, I studied. I borrowed books from the library, anything I could get my hands on. Manuals on mechanics, guides to small business management, even basic computer skills. I sat at library computers long after my eyes blurred, teaching myself everything from spreadsheets to how to write a proper email. The world was changing fast and I was determined not to be left behind. There were sacrifices, plenty of them. I missed out on friendships, on fun, on anything that didn't feed the grind. Birthdays passed without candles or cake. Holidays were just another workday. While others went out, laughed, lived, I worked. Some nights I'd hear the sounds of life outside my window. Music, laughter, conversations, and feel the ache of isolation. But I reminded myself why I was doing it. The nights of hunger, the cold, the shame of being invisible to the world. I'd survived all that. And I was building something now, brick by brick. There were setbacks along the way. Times when I lost a job because the business folded or because I just couldn't keep up the pace. Times when I got sick and couldn't afford a doctor, so I worked through fevers and coughs. Times when I felt like the universe was testing just how much I could take. But each time I dusted myself off and kept going. As I had to. Because there was no one else to do it for me. Over time, the hustle became more than survival. It became a kind of strength. I learned how to negotiate, how to spot a bad deal before it burned me, how to make every hour count. The city that once felt so cold and overwhelming became a map I could navigate in my sleep. I knew where to find the best deals, the safest places to rest, the people who might give you a chance if you showed up and worked hard. The tin of savings grew heavier, then became a balance in a bank account that I watched climb dollar by dollar. I started thinking beyond the next meal or the next rent payment. I dreamed of owning something. A business maybe, or a home. Something that couldn't be taken away from me on a whim. And slowly those dreams stopped feeling like fantasies. They started feeling possible. The hustle wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with praise or applause. No one saw the long hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. But I saw them. I felt them. And I knew that every drop of sweat, every calloused hand, every quiet victory was a piece of the foundation I was building. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was climbing. And with each passing day I was closer to the life I had fought so hard to claim. The idea came to me during one of those long nights when sleep wouldn't come and the hum of the city outside my window felt louder than my own thoughts. I sat at the tiny desk in my room, the same one I'd bought secondhand with my first decent paycheck, and stared at the small notebook where I kept my plans, my numbers, my dreams. The hustle had gotten me this far. I had a roof over my head, a bank account that no longer hovered at zero, and enough steady work to keep the lights on. But deep down I knew I couldn't spend my whole life chasing hours and working until my body gave out. I needed to build something of my own. I needed to create a future that no boss or landlord could take away from me. It started with a simple observation. Every morning before my first shift, I'd pass the same construction sites and office buildings, watching crews gather for the day. Guys with their coffee in hand, some eating breakfast from greasy paper bags, others just trying to shake off the cold. More often than not, I'd see them gathered around food trucks, waiting in long lines for overpriced, mediocre sandwiches or lukewarm coffee. It struck me there was a need here, a gap. These workers were up before dawn, hungry, tired, and too busy to make their own meals. And I knew how to work. I knew how to cook. What if I could bring the food to them, but better, hotter, fresher, faster? I didn't have money for a truck or fancy equipment, but I had grit. And sometimes grit is worth more than gold. The first step was simple. I took a chunk of my savings, the part I'd set aside for someday, and bought a heavy-duty cooler, a decent coffee thermos, and enough ingredients to make a small batch of breakfast burritos and sandwiches. I spent an entire night in my tiny kitchen cooking, wrapping, labeling. Each one made with care, seasoned just right, packed to stay warm. By sunrise, I had a cooler full of food, a thermos of strong coffee, and more nerves than I'd ever felt in my life. I staked out a spot near one of the bigger construction sites downtown, standing just beyond where the official food trucks parked. My heart pounded as I called out, offering fresh, hot breakfast for a couple bucks less than what the trucks were charging. The first few workers walked past without even looking at me. I felt the sting of rejection, that familiar voice in my head telling me I was foolish, that no one wanted what I had to offer. But I stayed put. I kept calling out, kept smiling. And then one guy stopped. He was about my age, wearing a hard hat and a jacket stained with paint. He looked at the cooler, then at me. "What you got?" he asked. I opened the lid and let him see. The smell of eggs, bacon, and warm tortillas rose into the chilly morning air. His eyes lit up. He bought 2 burritos and a coffee. Took a bite right there on the sidewalk and grinned. "Damn," he said, "this is good." A minute later, a few of his buddies came over, curious. By the time the site's morning bell rang, I was down to just a couple sandwiches and an empty thermos. That first day was small, but it felt huge. I went home exhausted but exhilarated. I counted the money, not much but enough to cover my costs and then some. More importantly, I saw proof that my idea had legs. People were willing to take a chance on me, to pay for something I made with my own 2 hands. So I kept going. Each night after my other jobs, I cooked. Each morning I showed up, cooler in hand, ready to feed the early risers. Word spread. The guys started calling me the breakfast man. They'd wave when they saw me coming, sometimes place orders the day before. I added more items. fruit cups, muffins, juice. I bought a second cooler so I could carry more. The regular food trucks didn't love me, but I wasn't stealing their business outright. I was filling a gap they'd overlooked. As the weeks went on, I saved every extra dollar. I bought better supplies, upgraded my coffee thermos, printed simple business cards with my name and number. I kept records of what sold best, adjusted my recipes, listened to what the workers wanted. They told me what sites they'd be at next, and I followed. My little operation grew one sandwich at a time. It wasn't just about the food. I learned to connect with people, to remember names and orders, to ask about their day. I became part of their routine. They became part of mine. The city didn't feel so lonely anymore. Every sale, every smile, every see you tomorrow, reminded me that I wasn't invisible. I was building something real. Eventually, I got the chance to rent a small cart from a vendor who was retiring. It wasn't much, a battered old thing with peeling paint, but it was mine. I fixed it up, cleaned it until it shone, painted it with my own hands. No more coolers. No more standing on the edge of the trucks. Now I had my own corner, my own setup. The day I rolled that cart into place, I felt like I'd won the lottery. With the cart came more possibilities. I could cook on site now, keep everything hotter, fresher. The crowds grew. Office workers started lining up beside the construction crews. I expanded my hours, added lunch items. The money wasn't huge yet, but it was steady. More than that, it was mine. Every dollar I made felt like a step toward the future I'd once thought out of reach. The thrill of it kept me going. The long nights of prep, the early mornings, the endless cleaning and hauling, they didn't feel like work. They felt like purpose. I started dreaming bigger. Maybe a second cart, maybe a food truck one day. I started looking at small business workshops, learning about permits and licensing, building credit. All the things I once thought were for people who had more than I did. Now they were within reach. What fueled me most wasn't just the business. It was knowing that I had created this. No one handed it to me. No one saved me. I had taken scraps, an idea, a cooler, a few ingredients, and turned them into a life. And with each passing day, I believed more and more that I could turn it into something lasting, something I could be proud of. The entrepreneurial spark lit a fire inside me that no setback could snuff out. I knew the road ahead would be hard. There would be challenges I couldn't yet see. But I also knew this. I had built myself from nothing before. Now I was building a future. And this time it was mine to claim. The first real taste of success didn't come in a grand moment. There was no parade, no headline, no sudden flood of wealth. It came quietly in the form of small victories that together started to change my life. One day I realized I didn't wake up afraid anymore. I didn't have to count every penny before going to the grocery store. My phone rang with opportunities instead of collection threats. That's when I knew I was climbing the ladder. Not fast, not without struggle, but surely rung by rung. The cart that had once felt like my biggest achievement became the foundation for something larger. I saved and reinvested every extra dollar, resisting the temptation to relax or celebrate too soon. I used the profits to buy a second cart, then a third. I hired my first employee, a young guy named Jamal who reminded me of myself at 16. Eager, desperate for a break, but determined to make something of himself. Together we doubled the business. Where I once served 20 or 30 people a morning, now we were feeding hundreds at different sites at different hours. The city started to know our name. The little logo I'd scribbled on paper became a recognizable sign to workers across downtown. Recognition came slowly but surely. A local paper did a small piece on us, calling it the hardest working breakfast crew in town. That article brought more customers, more interest. A community college invited me to speak to their business students. I almost laughed when I got the email, thinking they must have made a mistake. But no, it was real. I stood in front of that class, hands shaking, and told my story. About the cooler, the cart, the dream. I saw the way they listened. I saw myself in their faces, the hunger, the hope. And for the first time I felt like maybe I had something worth sharing beyond food. With the business growing, I finally moved out of the cramped apartment that had been my home for so long. I found a small house on the edge of the city, not fancy, not big, but mine. A place with a little yard, a porch where I could sit at night and breathe. I bought furniture that wasn't secondhand. I hung photos on the walls. Felt like building a life, brick by brick, not just surviving anymore. Promotions came, but not in the traditional sense. I wasn't working for someone else to get a title or a corner office. I was promoting myself. From cart owner to food truck operator. From food truck to small cafe owner. The day I signed the lease on that cafe, just a narrow storefront with a tiny kitchen and 10 tables, I stood alone inside it and let myself cry for the first time in years. I remembered the parks I'd slept in, the shelters I'd hidden in, the nights I'd gone hungry. And now I was standing inside a place with my name on the door. Success changed my circumstances in ways I hadn't imagined. It gave me stability. I no longer feared the end of the month. I no longer wondered where the next meal would come from. I could give back. I started sponsoring meals at shelters, offering jobs to people who needed a second chance. I remembered the kindness of strangers during my hardest times, and I tried to pay it forward wherever I could. My business became more than just a way to make a living. It became a way to make a difference. Of course, with success came new challenges. Managing employees, handling taxes, navigating city permits. It was overwhelming at times. But I approached it the way I had approached everything else. One step at a time, one problem at a time. I asked for help when I needed it. I took classes, read books, watched videos. I wasn't afraid to admit what I didn't know. That humility became one of my greatest strengths. I started to see how people treated me differently, too. When I was struggling, invisible, people barely looked me in the eye. Now, as a business owner, as someone who made it, I was respected. Invited to events, asked for advice, praised in public. And while part of me felt proud, another part never forgot how conditional that respect could be. I stayed grounded by remembering where I came from. I kept the first cooler I'd used, dented and stained, in the back office of my cafe as a reminder. Climbing the ladder didn't mean I was done. I knew there would always be more to learn, more to build, more to give. But for the first time I felt like I wasn't climbing alone. I had a team. I had customers who supported me, a community that cheered me on. I had a future that wasn't defined by my past. What success gave me more than money or recognition was peace of mind. The nights weren't sleepless anymore. The mornings weren't filled with dread. I woke up with purpose. I went to bed with gratitude. I no longer lived day to day waiting for the next disaster. I planned, I dreamed, I worked. And as I looked ahead, I saw not just where I'd been but where I could go. The ladder stretched higher and I was ready to climb. Wealth changes many things, but it doesn't fill the hollow spaces left by the people who walked away. As my business grew, as my name became known in the city and my bank account grew healthier than I'd ever imagined, I thought maybe the success would quiet the ache. I thought maybe with enough work, enough money, enough recognition, I'd stop hearing the echoes of that night when they left me behind. But wealth couldn't drown out those memories. And in the quiet hours when the cafe lights were off and the city outside my window had gone to sleep, the ghosts of my past came back to sit with me. There were nights when I'd stand at the window of my small house, the house I'd bought with my own hard work, the house that should have felt like a sanctuary, and stare out at the empty street, wondering where they were. My mother's laugh, my father's voice, my siblings' chatter, they were sounds I hadn't heard in so long, but they lived inside me like a song I couldn't forget. I'd built a life that should have felt complete. I had employees who respected me, customers who depended on me, friends who admired what I'd built from nothing. And yet that missing piece, the absence of the people who should have been proudest of me, was something I couldn't ignore. When I was 16 and they left, I used to tell myself that if I could just succeed, if I could just prove I was worth loving, they'd come back. Every burrito I sold, every cart I added, every dollar I saved, I imagined it was a message to them, proof that I wasn't the failure they'd abandoned. But as the years passed, as the business grew and I achieved milestones I never dreamed possible, I started to see the truth. They hadn't left because of who I was. They'd left because of who they were. And no amount of success on my part could change that. Still, knowing that didn't make the nights easier. I'd sit at my kitchen table long after dinner dishes were cleared, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, and think about all the moments they'd missed. The first cart, the first food truck, signing the lease on the cafe, buying this house. None of it had their fingerprints on it. I had no one to call after a good day, no one to say, "Look what I've done. Are you proud?" That emptiness gnawed at me even as I tried to fill it with work and generosity. I thought back to birthdays I'd spent alone, holidays I'd worked through because the alternative was sitting in silence, feeling the weight of their absence. I thought about the times I saw other families at the cafe, parents beaming at their kids, siblings laughing together, and felt that sharp, familiar sting of longing. I'd smile and serve them, but inside, a part of me always wondered what it would have felt like to have that for myself. Sometimes I'd go through old photographs, the few I'd kept after they left. Pictures of us at the beach, at the park, around the dinner table. Smiling faces, arms draped over shoulders, eyes bright with what I used to believe was love. I'd study those photos for signs, clues I might have missed. Was there a moment when it all started to fall apart? A glance, a distance, a look that said, "We're going to leave?" But the pictures gave me no answers. Just reminders of a time that felt like it belonged to someone else. I had built wealth, yes. I had security. I had independence. But I didn't have peace. The betrayal ran too deep. The questions I carried, why wasn't I enough? What had I done wrong? Still haunted me even if I told myself I'd moved on. Success couldn't erase those questions. It couldn't fill the quiet, dark spaces where those doubts lived. Some nights I'd take long walks through the city, wandering past the places that had shaped me. The parks where I'd slept when I had nowhere else to go. The corner where I'd sold my first breakfast burrito. The tiny apartment where I'd stayed up counting every cent. These places reminded me of how far I'd come, but they also reminded me of how alone I'd been. How much I'd wanted someone, anyone, to see me, to tell me I was doing okay. There were moments when I considered reaching out, tracking them down. The internet made it possible. I could have found them, could have called, could have written. But every time the urge rose, I stopped myself. What would I say? What could they say that would make the years disappear? The child in me still wanted answers, still wanted an apology, still wanted to be wanted. But the adult in me knew better. I knew that chasing ghosts wouldn't bring peace. It would only open wounds that had taken years to scar over. I kept busy. I expanded the business, started mentoring young entrepreneurs, donated to causes that mattered to me. I filled my days with purpose. But at night, when the work was done and the world was quiet, I was left with my thoughts. I'd stare at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of the city, and wonder if they ever thought of me. If they missed me. If they regretted leaving. If they even knew what I'd built, what I'd become. Wealth gave me freedom. It gave me choices I'd never had before. But it didn't heal the ache of abandonment. It didn't bring peace. Peace, I realized, wasn't something I could buy or earn. It was something I'd have to make for myself in time, in my own way. And maybe that was the next rung on the ladder I had to climb. Not toward more success, but toward forgiveness, toward acceptance, toward letting go of the people who had let go of me. Until then, I kept going. I woke up each morning and worked hard. I treated people with kindness. I tried to be the kind of person I wished they had been for me. And every night as I stood at my window and looked out at the city I called home, I reminded myself of how far I'd come, and how much further I still had to go, not in wealth but in peace. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that felt unremarkable in every way. The cafe had been busy during the morning rush, and now the lull between lunch and dinner gave me a chance to sit at my desk in the back office, sorting through invoices and payroll. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clatter of dishes in the kitchen were the only sounds filling the space. My phone, face down beside my laptop, buzzed once. I ignored it at first, focused on reconciling a delivery receipt that didn't match the order. Then it buzzed again. And again. Something about the insistence of it made me flip it over and look. There on the screen was a number I didn't recognize. No name attached, just 10 digits that meant nothing to me at first glance. I almost dismissed it as another spam call or wrong number. But then I saw the message icon, the tiny bubble that meant whoever it was had left a voicemail. Some part of me hesitated. Something about the timing, the persistence, the unfamiliar number that felt like it carried weight. With a sigh, I pressed play, half expecting a robocall pitch or wrong number apology. But it wasn't that. The voice on the recording was shaky, older, and achingly familiar. It took only a few words for the breath to leave my lungs, for my heart to pound in my ears. My father. After all these years, after all this time, it was his voice crackling through my phone like a ghost dragged out of the past. Hey, it's been a long time. I don't even know if this is still your number, but, well, I guess I'm hoping it is. We'd like to talk. Your mother, she's not well. We're back in town. If you want to see us, we're staying at the Greenway Motel off Route 9. No pressure. Just, think about it, okay? There was a pause, and for a second I thought he might say more. Might explain, might apologize, might give me something I could hold on to. But then the message ended, leaving only silence and my own shallow breathing filling the room. I sat frozen, phone still in my hand, unable to move or think clearly. The world seemed to blur at the edges, the office around me fading as memories rushed in. The night they left. The empty house. The years of scraping by, of wondering where they were, why they'd done it, if they even thought of me. And now this. A voicemail, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if reaching out after all this time was no different than calling to confirm a dinner reservation. For a long time I didn't move. I didn't call back. I didn't delete the message. I just sat there, letting the weight of it settle over me like a heavy blanket. Questions swirled in my mind. Why now? Why here? What did they want? And beneath all that, the most painful question of all. Did I want to see them? The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, checking orders, answering emails, greeting customers, but my heart wasn't in it. My thoughts kept circling back to that message. I tried to imagine what they looked like now, older, different. I tried to hear in my father's voice any sign of remorse, of love, of anything real. But all I heard was uncertainty, maybe even fear. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, lights off, staring at the glowing screen of my phone as if it might offer answers. I played the message again. And again. Each time it hurt in a new way. Each time I felt that same storm of anger, confusion, longing. I thought about deleting it, about blocking the number, about pretending it never happened. But I couldn't. A part of me needed to know what they wanted. Needed to see their faces. Needed to understand. The next morning I drove to the Greenway Motel. I told myself I wouldn't get out of the car, that I'd just see if they were really there. The place was exactly as I remembered it. A squat, tired building with peeling paint and a flickering sign that always seemed one storm away from giving out completely. I parked across the street and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, stomach knotted. For a long time nothing happened. Then I saw them. My father came out of one of the rooms, looking older, thinner, his shoulders stooped in a way I didn't remember. My mother followed, slower, leaning heavily on a cane. Her hair, once dark, was now almost entirely gray. She looked fragile in a way that startled me. They stood there, speaking quietly to each other, unaware that I was watching from the safety of my car. Seeing them like that, real, vulnerable, undid something in me. They weren't the towering figures of my childhood anymore. They were just people. People who had hurt me, yes, but people who had aged, who had clearly struggled in their own way. I didn't get out that day. I couldn't. I drove away, heart pounding, unsure of what I felt. Part of me was furious. How dare they come back now after everything? How dare they act like it was that simple? But another part of me, smaller but insistent, felt something like sorrow. They were here. They were reaching out. And that meant something, didn't it? Or did it? The days that followed were filled with tension I couldn't shake. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. I avoided the cafe's regular customers who knew me too well, afraid they'd see the turmoil in my eyes. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. This was a wound I wasn't ready to show. They left another message a few days later. This time it was my mother's voice, soft and tentative. We don't want to cause trouble. We miss you. We're sorry. Please, can we talk? Hearing her voice, hearing the word sorry, it cracked something inside me. But it didn't erase the years of silence, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the milestones they'd missed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to feel. And that was the hardest part of all. That unwanted call, those few words, stirred up a storm inside me I hadn't expected. I thought I'd built a wall strong enough to keep them out forever. But the truth was they'd never really left. Not from my mind. Not from my heart. Now with one message they'd reopened a door I wasn't sure I wanted open. And I stood at the threshold, unsure if I should step through or slam it shut for good. The morning I decided to see them, the air felt heavier somehow, as if the universe itself understood that something long overdue was about to unfold. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection, barely recognizing the person who looked back at me. My face was older, my eyes sharper, lined with the weight of years I had spent fighting, scraping, surviving. I wondered for a moment what they would see when they looked at me now. Would they recognize their child in this version of me? Did they even remember the face they left behind? The drive to the Greenway Motel felt endless, though I knew the way by heart after that first time I had watched them from across the street. The sky hung low, thick with gray clouds that threatened rain but never quite delivered. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white, heart thudding so loudly I was sure it would drown out every other sound. With every mile, my mind raced through 100 scenarios, what I would say, what they might say, how it could end. I tried to rehearse the words I had carried for so long, but they tangled in my head, tripping over each other, turning to ash before they could form sentences. When I pulled into the motel parking lot, I sat there for a long time, engine running, staring at the faded door of their room. Room 6. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the glow of a lamp through the thin fabric. My stomach churned. I killed the engine, stepped out, and felt the cool wind hit my face, snapping me out of my haze. The air smelled faintly of rain, of asphalt, of something old and forgotten. Just like this place, just like this moment. I walked up to the door, my footsteps loud against the cracked pavement, and raised my hand to knock. I hesitated. For one terrifying second I considered turning around, getting back in the car, driving away, letting the past stay buried. But then I knocked. Once. Twice. And then the door opened. It was my father who stood there first. His face seemed even older up close, the lines deeper, the skin thinner, the eyes tired. For a moment he just looked at me as if unsure whether I was real. Then his lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. My mother appeared behind him, frail, leaning on her cane, eyes wide and glistening. The three of us stood frozen, caught between the years that had passed and the moment that had arrived. "Can we come in?" I asked, my voice steady even though my heart was anything but. He stepped aside and I walked in, feeling the small, stale room close in around me. It smelled of old cigarettes and cleaning supplies, and the hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting. They sat down on the edge of the bed as if unsure what to do or say. "So," I began, the word hanging heavy in the air. "This is it. After all these years, this is how it happens." My father opened his mouth again, but my mother spoke first. "We didn't know how to find you," she said, voice soft, shaky. "We didn't know if you'd want to see us." "You didn't know how to find me?" I laughed, bitter and hollow. "You didn't even look." My father winced as if my words were a physical blow. "That's not true. Things were complicated. We had reasons. We thought it was for the best at the time." "For the best." The anger rose so fast I could barely control it. "For the best. You left me. You didn't leave a number. You didn't leave an address. You left a goddamn photograph with 'good luck' on the back, like that was enough. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What I went through?" My mother's eyes filled with tears and she covered her mouth with one trembling hand. My father shook his head, looking down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "We were scared. We were in a bad place. We didn't know what else to do." "You didn't know what else to do?" My voice cracked under the weight of everything I'd held in for so long. "You're my parents. Your job was to protect me, not run away when things got hard." I was a kid. 16. I woke up to an empty house. I knocked on neighbors' doors. I called every number I could remember. I sat there waiting for you to come back, thinking maybe this was some sick mistake. But you never came back. You left me to fend for myself, and you never even checked if I survived. Tears spilled down my mother's cheeks. My father finally looked at me, his eyes red, his face drawn tight with guilt. "You're right," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You're absolutely right. We failed you. We failed ourselves. There's nothing we can say to change that." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, to break something, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain I'd carried. But instead I stood there, shaking, the storm inside me raging. "Why now?" I demanded. "Why reach out after all this time?" My mother wiped at her face, hands trembling. "Because we're old. Because we're tired. Because we've lived with this regret every single day and we couldn't bear it anymore. Because I'm sick and I don't want to leave this world without telling you I'm sorry." The words hit me like a wave. I felt my anger falter, replaced by something I didn't want to name. Pity, sadness, love buried so deep I thought it was gone. "I don't know what you expect from me," I said quietly. "You think we can just pretend the last decade didn't happen? That we can be a family again?" "No," my father said, his voice thick. "We don't expect that. We don't deserve that. We just want a chance to say we're sorry. A chance to know if there's any way back from this." I looked at them. Two people who had made choices that shattered my world, who were now just fragile, broken humans seeking forgiveness. I didn't know what I felt. I didn't know what I could give. But I knew this. The confrontation I'd imagined 1,000 times didn't bring the closure I thought it would. It only opened more doors, more questions, more pain. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncertain. And in that silence, I realized that no apology, no excuse, no tearful admission would ever undo what had been done. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. The motel room was thick with silence after that confrontation, the kind of silence that presses in on your chest, making it hard to breathe. I stood near the window, staring out at the rain that had finally started to fall. The water slid down the glass in slow, steady streams, blurring the view of the empty parking lot and flickering streetlights. Behind me, I could hear them, my mother's soft, uneven breaths as she tried to compose herself, and my father shifting his weight on the bed, his hands probably knotted together in that nervous way I remembered from my childhood. The storm outside felt like it belonged to this moment, like the sky itself was trying to wash away the mess of our lives. But no amount of rain could undo the years that had stretched between us, years filled with loneliness, survival, and unanswered questions. And now, after everything, I was left standing at a crossroads I never thought I'd face. They wanted forgiveness. Or maybe not even that. Maybe they just wanted a sliver of hope that they could matter to me again. But I didn't know if I had it in me. The rage, the grief, the scars they'd left behind, they weren't things that could be smoothed over with tears and apologies. I had spent so long building my life on the ruins they left behind, convincing myself I didn't need them, that I was better off without them. Letting them in now felt like opening a door to ghosts I'd worked too hard to shut out. My father finally broke the silence. "We don't expect you to decide anything right now," he said, his voice hoarse, tired. We wanted to see you. To tell you how sorry we are. And if there's anything you want from us, answers or space or even nothing, we'll respect it." I kept my eyes on the rain, watching as it gathered in puddles that reflected the flickering lights. I wished more than anything that the choice were simple. That I could say with certainty whether to let them in or shut them out for good. But nothing about this was simple. They were my parents. They had given me life, but they had also taken so much from me. Could I forgive them? Could I trust them? Or would letting them back in just reopen wounds that had barely started to heal? "I don't know what you want me to say," I murmured, my breath fogging up the window. "I've spent more than 10 years trying to make sense of what happened. Trying to be okay without you. And now you're here and I don't know if I'm supposed to feel relief or anger or, I don't know. It's all too much." My mother's voice came, soft, hesitant. "We're not asking you to feel anything you don't. We're not asking for forgiveness, not if you're not ready. We just didn't want to leave this world without telling you we were wrong. Without saying that we've thought of you every day. That we never stopped loving you even if it didn't look that way." The weight of her words sank into me, heavy and painful. I turned around, finally facing them again. My father's shoulders were slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. My mother's hands were clenched in her lap, as if she was holding herself together with sheer will. They looked so small, so human, so breakable. Not the towering figures from my childhood, not the people who had once seemed capable of anything, including abandoning me. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, surprising myself. "I thought I did. For a long time I thought I hated you. But I don't. I'm just tired. Tired of carrying this. Tired of wondering why. Tired of wishing things had been different." Tears slid down my mother's cheeks, silent and steady. My father nodded, swallowing hard. "We don't deserve anything from you. But thank you for saying that." I sat down then for the first time since I'd arrived, sinking into the creaky chair near the door. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to think, trying to feel. The memories came in a flood. The empty house, the endless nights alone, the hunger, the fear, the small victories I'd clung to just to stay afloat. And now here they were, asking me to make a choice I never thought I'd have to make. Could I let them in? Could I find room in my life for the people who had broken it apart? And if I did, would it be for them or for me? Did I want closure, or did I want revenge, or did I just want peace? The hours blurred together as we talked. Or rather, as they talked and I listened. They told me about the years I hadn't seen, the struggles they'd faced, the regrets that haunted them. They told me about the night they left, how desperate and afraid they'd been, how they thought they were protecting me by getting away from whatever trouble they were in. They told me how they'd searched too late, how they'd been too ashamed, too broken to face me when they finally could. And through it all, I felt the walls I'd built inside me tremble. Not collapse, not yet, but tremble under the weight of truth and time. I didn't know if I believed everything they said. I didn't know if it mattered. What I knew was that the choice before me wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. About who I wanted to be. About what I needed to move forward. When dawn began to lighten the sky, I stood to leave. My father rose as well, but didn't try to stop me. My mother looked up at me with tired, hopeful eyes. "I don't know where we go from here," I said, my voice low. "But I'll think about it. That's all I can promise." And that was the truth. I couldn't give them everything they wanted. I couldn't erase the past. But I could consider the future, whatever that meant. As I walked out into the pale light of morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the world fresh and quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could choose a path forward that was my own. Weeks passed after that night in the motel, but the weight of the decision didn't leave me. It stayed with me, shadowing every quiet moment. In the hush of early mornings when I sipped coffee alone at the window, in the steady hum of workdays that blurred together, in the stillness of nights when sleep felt just out of reach. My parents' faces haunted my thoughts, not in anger the way they once had, but in uncertainty. I had spent so many years imagining how I'd feel if they ever came back, how I'd react, what I'd say. I thought the choice would be easy, that I'd slam the door in their faces or welcome them with open arms. But nothing about this was easy. Every time I replayed that night in my mind, I heard their words, saw the regret in their eyes, felt the ache in their voices. And still, I questioned whether they had earned a place in the life I'd built. A life forged in fire, in loneliness, in determination. A life I had created not because of them but in spite of them. Letting them in felt like inviting the past to sit at my table, and I wasn't sure if that was what I wanted. One Saturday morning, I found myself at the edge of the city, standing on the cliffs that overlooked the sea. The wind whipped at my jacket, cold and sharp as the ocean crashed far below. I used to come here when I was younger, back when I still believed in things like second chances and happy endings. The view hadn't changed, endless, powerful, untamed. But I had learned that life wasn't about neat resolutions or perfect answers. It was about the choices we made with what we were given. I stayed there for hours thinking. About everything. About the kid I had been at 16, abandoned and terrified. About the young adult who had fought tooth and nail to survive. About the person I was now, strong but scarred, successful but still searching for something I couldn't quite name. And slowly, quietly, I realized that this decision wasn't about my parents anymore. It wasn't about what they deserved. It was about what I needed. What I wanted for my own peace. That night I wrote them a letter. Not an angry letter, not a letter full of accusations or questions. Just honest words. I told them I heard them. That I believed their regret was real even if it had come too late. I told them I didn't hate them and that I hoped they found whatever peace they were looking for. But I also told them that I needed to move forward without reopening old wounds. That I forgave them not for them but for me. Because I didn't want to carry the weight of it anymore. I didn't want my life to be defined by the pain they caused. I wanted it to be defined by what I built in spite of it. I mailed the letter without giving myself a chance to second-guess it. And when I walked out of that post office I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Light. Like I'd put down a burden I'd been dragging behind me for far too long. The sky seemed clearer, the air fresher. Maybe it was just my imagination but I let myself believe it was more than that. I let myself believe that this was the start of something new. In the weeks that followed I kept living my life. My work thrived, my small business continued to grow and I kept learning, kept pushing myself. I made time for things I'd neglected. Quiet evenings with a book, long walks just to enjoy the world around me, conversations with friends I'd grown close to over the years. And slowly the ache in my chest began to fade. The nights grew easier. The memories stopped haunting me at every turn. I never heard back from my parents. Maybe they respected my choice. Maybe they didn't know how to respond. Maybe they were too caught up in their own journey to reach out again. I didn't know and I didn't need to. What mattered was that I had made my choice. I had chosen peace. I had chosen to let go of the bitterness that had weighed me down for so long. I had chosen to honor the life I had fought so hard to build. And in that choice I found freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I stood on my apartment balcony and looked out at the city that had become my home. The city where I had struggled, fallen, and risen again. The city that had witnessed my hardest days and my greatest triumphs. And I felt for the first time in a long time at home. Truly at home. The past would always be a part of me. The scars would always be there. But they didn't define me anymore. They were just part of the story. A story I had the power to continue writing on my terms. I smiled, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on my face. A new chapter was beginning and this time I was the one holding the pen.